and I'd like to begin tonight with our land acknowledgement. The city of Portsmouth is on the homelands of the Abenaki people who have ongoing cultural and spiritual connections to this area. According to tribal oral tradition, Abenaki people have lived in a place now called New Hampshire for more than 12,000 years, since before tribal memory. The Abenaki are part of a larger group of indigenous people who call themselves Wabanaki, or People of the Dawn, and form one of many communities connected by a common language family. Here at the Portsmouth Public Library, we are committed to acknowledging and honoring the human history tied to this land. So, also here at the library, we love to offer programs that we hope will resonate with our community, and we always love hearing from you about what you'd like to see. So I'm going to ask that you fill out an event feedback form on your way out. They're just in the hallway on the table on the right. And the feedback we receive really does help us in our planning and to show our thanks. Anyone who fills out a feedback form will be entered to win a library tote bag. And they are made in New Hampshire, and they can hold a ton of books. So tonight's program is part of our local history series, which we've tailored this year, the year of Portsmouth's celebration of its settlement by European colonists, to provide a broad glimpse into the history of Portsmouth and all that it encompasses. This includes bringing you panel discussions like tonight's that incorporate more voices into the conversation. And we've also revived our Indigenous Stories series to explore beyond the 400-year benchmark. So for those interested in further information about the Indigenous history of the area, we have a list of learning resources linked from our land acknowledgement page on our website. And be sure to sign up for our library newsletter to stay on top of all of our upcoming programs. So let's dive right in. I'm going to hand it over to Steve Butzel, our moderator for today's discussion.
Sarah. All right, we have a great group here tonight, I can tell. So, and a phenomenal panelists that you're really going to enjoy. We'll start off with introductions, and then we have a series of questions. One that will be for the entire panel, and then we'll go specific questions for each panelist and allow them to have a conversation. And throughout, if you have a burning desire to ask a question along the way, raise your hand, I'll catch you, and I'll try to incorporate that. And certainly there'll probably be breaks along the way where we'll stop and ask for commentary. How's that sound? Good enough to everybody? All right, great. All right, so my name is Steve Butzel. I was the assistant director here for 8 years, and then the library director for, I think I've got it backwards, 6 years and then 8 years. So very happy to be back at the library. I'm currently the interim library director in Wrentham, Massachusetts, and started my own business called Uncomfortable Fun, providing leadership coaching one-on-one to organizational leaders and various other things. But I'd like to have our panelists introduce themselves, so take it away.
Sure. My name is Rodney Rowland. I'm Director of Facilities and Environmental Sustainability at Strawberry Bank Museum. I've been at Strawberry Bank a very long time. I started as a volunteer when my parents were there back in 1976. And then had an internship there out of college, and then a year after graduation they hired me for a part-time grant-funded position, and then couldn't get rid of me, so I'm still there today. My focus, I actually originally was working with the collections department, dealing with the exhibits and the decorative arts collection. I did that for 15 years, and then transferred to the facilities department, where I head up a great crew that's in charge of the building restoration, building maintenance, landscape division, security, just about everything you can think of, event management, all that stuff. So lately, my job has become probably 80% dealing with the flooding that we are experiencing at Strawberry Bank. We'll get more into that this evening, but it's a very important and obviously crucial topic for Strawberry Bank to solve, along with many other coastal communities around the world. So we're not alone in this, and that's been part of the adventure, is meeting with people and learning what they're doing and what impacts they're seeing. So.
Thanks. Lucia?
My name is Lucia Hillman. I'm a senior at Portsmouth High School. I am in the PHS Eco Club, and I'm very interested in the environment and sustainability. I kitchen in Portsmouth in the Hanford Plaza, and I like to go on walks and listen to podcasts and do yoga and go to the gym in my free time and spend time with my family and friends.
Great. Brian.
Hi everybody, my name is Brian Murphy, and I'm a principal architect and co-founder of Placework. We're an architecture and planning firm here in Portsmouth with a focus on community and the environment. I also am a dad and a husband and a musician.
Fantastic. And we unfortunately do not have Anna Nuttall with us. Fantastic award-winning art instructor and leader in the community, works in the Portsmouth education system at the middle school, so hi out there to Anna. And I do want to let you know that we, in envisioning this program, we have several themes in mind. Certainly you've heard already about sustainability and environment, education, architecture, social topics. And when we think about 400 years, we also want to open it up to, 100, 200, 300, 400 years. So it's, well, it might be a little bit difficult to exactly predict 400 years from now. It's perfectly fine to move into the, I wonder what it will be like in 100 years and what it might be like in 200 years. So we're good with that, okay? All right, great. So, getting to our first question, 400 years ago, David Thompson landed on the shores of the Piscataqua with the hopes of finding adventure and wealth. Shortly after his arrival, he was gifted an indigenous slave, the first known enslaved person in New Hampshire, but not the last, as a slave auction was set up near what is now Prescott Park. We know this area is filled with loads of history. It's on every street and around every corner. The lessons we can learn from the past are never ending, both very beautiful and very painful. But what we do, let me slow down and get this right, but what do we do with all that knowledge? And how can we use it going forward? So that's kind of the point of emphasis. And let's get started with some basics. For all the panelists, first question is, what does an environmentally, economically, and socially thriving Portsmouth look like in 400 years? And we'd like to give you each at least 3 minutes to share some brief ideas. And go wild, use your imagination and tell us what you think. And why don't we start with Brian and work our way this way?
Thank you for starting with me. Well, I think that it's interesting that you frame those three particular realms of the environment, the economy, and human society. I think that relationship, as it is now, the way it changes going forward, will be what actually shapes the future of Portsmouth and the world in general. Currently, one of those three things, I believe, dominates the other two. We have an economy that is that extracts from the natural world and extracts from human beings, and in a way that is destructive and degrading to both of those. I think that economy is shifting toward an ecologically based system. I think I can see a future where that is the case. And in doing that, it becomes regenerative of both human beings. It changes our relationship with each other and our relationship with the natural world, and that will become the basis for our economy. And so what does that mean for the shape of Portsmouth, what Portsmouth looks like? I think, I think that'll just bring a whole different attitude to the way we make decisions about the world around us, how we shape the world around us. And I think Portsmouth will become a more welcoming place, and not that it's not welcoming now, but it will respond to climate change driven migration and also world population growth that will change that dynamic a little bit, and I think we will be prepared to welcome that and adapt to that rather than shutting that off.
Fantastic. Lucia?
Yeah, I feel like I agree with the whole, there needs to be balance for all three of those things to thrive. And so when I first kind of directed this question to the Eco Club, there was like some interesting ideas, either the unhopeful side, which like we won't even be here in 400 years if we don't make progress now. And then there was, we'll live on Mars, and then we will live like in the upper troposphere, like we'll live with flying cars and it'll be crazy and this and that. But yeah, I feel like there's a lot of ways that the world could evolve, but I feel like when I picture a thriving Portsmouth in 400 years, I hope that we still maintain greenery and hopefully restore more of our, the nature of Portsmouth, and whether that means like small scale regenerative farming where we have, where we rely more on the land and the ocean to produce our own food, and we kind of remove ourselves from the packaging industry and have more local food production, and then I also jotted down a couple ideas about reverting to indigenous ways of taking what we need and then leaving the rest. So I see a green Portsmouth in the way that we only consume what we need, and then we leave the rest to thrive on its own, and we appreciate the biodiversity and the just the natural state that the world is. And then I was also kind of thinking like, well, what if the food is like more technologically advanced? Like, will we be eating like animal cells that were taken from the animals and then like developed in crock pots, and then like we're eating, I don't know, random animal muscle tissues or whatever as, so there's a bunch of different ways that this could go, but yeah, I overall envision a greener Portsmouth, and hopefully we can still have, and we'll get into this later, but clean architecture and just clean energy jobs, and yeah. So.
Okay, thanks. Robbie?
Yeah, I agree with I like the point about the indigenous people who lived here and respected everything that they lived with. There's a wonderful book called White Pine, which is basically the history of the United States through the white pine. And you learn that the indigenous people respected the pine. Yes, they used lumber for various things, but they respected it and they didn't abuse it. And then the Europeans arrived and clear-cutted the white pine forests from Maine to the Great Lakes and built canals so that they could go farther. And humankind just has a problem with consumption. We just devour. And so my future is one where we find that balance again, where we look to try to use renewable sources. I think of things like the Fiske River that could offer us a tide energy source. It's like the second strongest current in the United States, and maybe there's a lot of energy there that we could capture and utilize. I like to think that we would use renewable building sources, a lot of adaptive reuse. When it comes to climate change and sea level rise, we're going to have some defeats, there's no question. Strawberry Bank has already lost some of its history, and I think we're probably probably gonna lose more. But we will have some victories too, and it's again gonna be finding that balance with where we can safely live, and where we decide to a point where we won't do all this consumption and have all these negative impacts on our planet, because that's going to matter too. Eventually, Mother Nature will win. We just don't have enough time and money to beat Mother Nature. So we're going to have to kind of find that balance, find that place where we can live the way we want to live with the planet rather than consuming it.
Okay, thank you very much. Anybody have any questions for any of the panelists so far? If you don't, that's fine. Okay, we can always come back to that. The themes of sustainability we're going to get to further in the next question. The issue of energy, the issue of agriculture, the issue of ethics. There's so many channels here to what you all described. We could go on for weeks. But I remember Lucia talking with my brother, who's a medical professional, and talking about how soon they will very likely have the capacity to grow animal muscle tissue, and are those the stakes that will be buying? You know, it is both fascinating and a little creepy, and yet it may happen. Okay, we're going to move on to Rodney. Ask you to speak a little bit further about sustainability initiatives and how they will be, whether you believe they will be a huge part of life on Earth going forward. We know that your work at Strawberry Bank has shown you firsthand how sea level rise can affect the city's historic homes and landscape. And so share with us a little bit more about what do you think the coastline will look like in 400 years, and is there anything or things that we can do to preserve the land at Portsmouth?
That is a very difficult question. The coastline is so diverse. If you start with the premise that the oldest parts of this country, the oldest parts of any country of the world, are on the water because they needed the water for transportation, they needed the water for a source of food, you realize that those are the most at-risk areas. So the very fabric of our culture is at risk. And there's a lot of coastline. It doesn't have to be an ocean, it can be a river, it can be a lake, it can be any body of water, and those bodies of water are all now changing, whether it be from floods, storm surges, astronomical high tides. And because humans tended to want to take more land for development, i.e. Puddle Dock at Strawberry Bank, which was filled in, think about the north end of Boston, those areas are particularly susceptible to increases in sea level rise. And so all of these areas are having to battle with, okay, what are we going to do? What are we going to be able to save? What are we not going to be able to save? We're going to lose some history. I think that's pretty clear. The National Trust in the UK has done an evaluation of all of their properties. They have hundreds of properties around the UK, and they have actually deemed some as that they're just going to let them go. They just can't afford to keep them all. And so they will literally take a structure that's on the water, and as the water encroaches, they will, over time, take the roof off the building and leave a relic. And that relic is going to tell the story of what happened, and hopefully inform future generations as to what happened and what they need to do to prevent it happening somewhere else. So I like to think there's going to be a lot of success stories, and if you travel around this country and around anywhere in Europe along the coast, you're going to see incredible technological advancements on how to stem the tide. Some work, some don't. Some were done a long time ago and have to be redone, but there is hope in that regard. Shameful plug, we're going to be hosting the Keeping History Above Water conference here in May. I have some cards over there. That is a conference that's dedicated to helping museums and the cultural sector of the United States on dealing with water issues. I've been traveling around this country, going to those conferences since 2017, and seen some unbelievable technology to solve flooding issues. And it gives me a lot of hope, especially when I think of the small area which we live in. You know, it's not exactly all of the United States. We just need to solve our problem. And I think there are ways to do that. I do think we'll have to make some compromises. And in fact, we're working with Brian's firm to kind of figure out where that compromise is going to be. You know, can we save a foundation of a 17th century building, or do we need to put up a nice modern dry-proof one? We're not sure yet. We're getting there. But so I think in terms of the future, we're going to see a lot of technology responding to this. That's what we're good at. I believe that the city of Portsmouth's fix for a lot of its flooding is to have a stormwater management system that works better than it currently does. It's pretty old right now, and it gets inundated by the river. And so I think there's ways to improve that system so that we have a place to put our stormwater when we need it most. I think you're going to see incredible changes to the landscape at Strawberry Bank to manage our stormwater, but it might be blended with honoring our history. Some of the history that was lost might be sort of recreated in the form of a stormwater management area, so that's kind of exciting. We have a lot of open space at Strawberry Bank, which historically isn't accurate, but fortunately offers us a great opportunity to store a lot of water, which is what we're having to do these days. So I think you're going to see a lot of that. And in fact, even if you travel around now, or you just have to listen to the news, you hear of tide gates, and you hear of elevating buildings and changing street elevations, and just all sorts of opportunities. Prescott Park going through a massive redo, moving a building, changing the road grade, a stormwater area, a new stormwater system put in. So you're starting to see that, and that's going to pick up speed as much as it possibly can. But the other side of that is that there's areas that we probably can't fix. I think of Fort Jefferson off the coast of Florida, which is on its own little island. It's an incredible historic, it's a national park. And there's no island, it's just water. And it just gets hit all the time by storms, and I don't know how you save that. And so, maybe you know, we had a retired professor at UNH call us and say that he felt Strawberry Bank needed to document its buildings and then walk away because it just wasn't going to be salvageable. And I think he's wrong. I hope he's wrong. I think there are ways that we can preserve the houses because we have the knowledge, we have the technology, and those things only get better over time. So we'll see, but I'm cautiously optimistic. I've done a lot of podcasts and radio interviews and some TV interviews, and reporters always seem to want to ask, do you have hope? I think on a global scale, it's difficult to have hope, but on a local scale, I have a lot of hope. I think we've got some really great minds in this community already doing great things, and so I do see a wonderful future for Portsmouth, just with maybe a different landscape.
Rodney, if I could ask a follow-up. 400 years from now, is there any chance that sea level rise will have reversed itself? How do you, when you think beyond the next 50 to 100 years, do you see climate change as being irreversible, as we sometimes heard reported, or do you think there's chances that actually, through human intervention technology or nature itself, that actually we might see some of that land recovered, if you will?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think to unwind what we've done to our climate is going to take a global effort. And certainly as I look at the news today, I just don't see that. Nations just don't agree on what is best practices for this planet. I think that's going to make it really difficult to unwind the damage that we've done and not have it accelerate. I do think that there's much better education for our youth that will be pushing that and pushing that. I do think that governments are going to get tired of trying to respond to disasters, and so that may turn them around. So I think it's hard to look globally and see a really bright future. But who knows? There's a lot of alternative energy solutions coming around. It's just trying to convince other governments and other nations that this is a direction that we all need to move into.
think we're going to move on to the next question before we do more intra-panel conversation, and this is obviously related to some of what was just discussed. So, Brian, your work is focused on sustainability and environmental responsibility, amongst other values, I'm sure. So, if Portsmouth conceivably is underwater in 400 years, what would houses look like, and how would you design a building or home knowing that rising sea levels will be a likely problem down the road, depending on the time frame?
That's a really interesting question. I see where it's pointed. It seems like it's begging for what cool things will we live in water.
You can redirect the question however you like.
No. I'll give my best answer, but I don't know if it'll redirect the question. But I think that's happening. By the way, there are people in the design field that are thinking about what that will look like, and we're actually seeing practical application of lifting buildings up that are in the way of the water, right? They were already there, we're lifting them up. Ironically, we're actually still building in these places that are being flooded. Right here locally, we're building, and we think that lifting them up is the answer. We'll just lift them up and have a space underneath for the water to flow through, but it lacks a systems thinking that is paramount and critical to our path forward. So your house will be okay, but how do you get to it? What happens to the things around your house, like your car, when the flood comes and the fuel out of your car leaks into the water system? It just lacks a whole, a thinking that is desperately needed. So I think the question of how we design for these conditions is not how we build or what we build, but it's where we build. I would start with making some critical decisions right away about places where we can build buildings and infrastructure and places that we cannot, and we start planning long term. 400 years is like almost 3 times 7 generation thinking that our indigenous predecessors practiced for a really long time, longer than we've been here. If we can think just one series, one set of 7 generations, and forget 400 years down the road, and think about where we're going to build and how we're going to live in these different places, and what Rodney's discussion was all over this about the things that we already have and how we preserve them, but how do we also move away from the danger. So what does this look like for buildings and architecture? Well, I'm an optimist, and I think that there's really wonderful possibility. I think that these conditions and our response in the built environment to how we behave in these conditions really lends itself to a new way of thinking about buildings. I think that our thinking and our relationship with buildings will be so much different. Buildings will be, we're already moving in this direction. We will be making buildings out of cellulose-like fibrous material, the plants and trees that grow on the surface of the earth, and when we take them and form them into the things we need, it grows back perpetually. And when we're done with the thing that we made out of that, it'll go back into the earth readily, rather than extracting minerals and fossil material out of the earth and forming it into things that causes damage to the environment and to ourselves. So that way of thinking, what does a 100% plant-based building look like? How do we interpret that architecturally? What is a new form that takes on? Buildings will become living organisms within the ecosystem that they're situated. Imagine that. Imagine all of the building input, energy, water. If the building only uses what falls on it, the sunlight, the rain, rather than having these elaborate, complex systems that feed the building. And building outputs, like trash, wastewater, food waste, if that all is just managed right where the building is and goes immediately back into the earth productively in a regenerative way, it's part of the ecosystem. So imagine the amazing interpretations of architecture that works like that. I think that, yeah, I feel like there's just so much possibility in that, and when we, I can't even imagine what the architecture will look like. I think that there will be brilliant minds that come along and interpret this. One thing that I do think will be important in this is that we move away from our sort of fixation on our traditional languages of architecture and building. We don't leave the things that we already have, the important artifacts and historic structures, but we stop trying to mimic them and use the same language to describe new things. And we recognize that we can represent ourselves in so many different ways through architecture. We can represent our communities and cultures more holistically and more inclusively through architecture. Our what we consider as being our architectural heritage doesn't represent everybody's experience. To some people, what we hold as historically valuable may feel oppressive or exclusive to some people in our community. And I think we have to be really cognizant of that and think about what the opportunities are there and how we more broadly include the whole community in our built environment and how we represent ourselves and our culture.
That's amazing. I'm an optimist too, so I'm glad to hear some optimism. And I'd love to hear if you, I'm putting you on the spot here, but of any shining examples that you tend to cite or that you admire of some of those structures or communities that where really the infrastructure is doing already what you're describing, or maybe is moving in that direction, whether it's here in the East Coast, the US, or anywhere else on the planet. Because some people might be interested to know, to go learn more about it. Or these more 20 years off, potentially.
I don't know that I can point to one complete example that represents all of this stuff, but I think that you can see. Well, there's always new architectural interpretation, even now amongst us. There always has been innovation and evolution in the built form. But I'm sort of blanking on the example.
That's all right. That's all right. Let me maybe narrow it down and then
Rodney.
I might have, I'm not an architect, so, but I had an opportunity. I had an opportunity to visit a platinum, Leeds Platinum building for the first time. It's an education classroom. It's a huge classroom complex, 3 floors, and all of the building materials were either recycled or locally sourced within a very short area. It's in Western Massachusetts. It's completely off the grid. It has geothermal wells underneath it, solar on the roof. The entire roof structure is designed so rather than shedding water like your typical house, the roofs are pitched inward into a valley, which takes the water across a living roof in 3 different places, and then it literally cascades off the roof outside of one of the student assembly areas so the students can see it happening, where it goes into a rock bed, and then it is filtered through about 300, 400 feet of rock bed before it's actually deposited into a local stream. So it's been pretty much completely filtered. So I just, everything about this building was about protecting the planet, and it's an educational institution. So they're using the students are inside looking at it and looking outside of it, learning how we can do this again. So I thought that was pretty good.
Steve, I can offer another, thank you, Rodney, for getting the wheels turning. But I can offer a resource if you just Google Living Building Challenge. You'll see lots of really wonderful examples of buildings that do all of these things. And one that I would point to in particular is it's a building in Leeds in England, and it's part of a hospital. And it's a pretty conventional, modern hospital facility that does all of the things that the best hospitals do. But they've added this, and I'm blanking on the name of this particular wing of the hospital that was recently constructed that achieves the Living Building Challenge certification. And it does all of these things with resources and management. It's made out of renewable materials, and it's a healthy environment, but it goes a step farther than just meeting those technical thresholds. The form and space and organization of the building is exquisite and really stimulating in a sort of in a biophilic way, in a biomimicking way, meaning it takes its cues from patterns found in the natural environment and uses this in the built environment. And I think what's most wonderful about the project is that it's designed as a healing center for people recovering from cancer, and it focuses less on the medical treatments and more on the environment and where the person recovers. And if we can all just move toward thinking that way about every building that we build, that we don't need to have a special facility for people who are experiencing special circumstances, but if we think about buildings for all of us, for all of the time, that are rejuvenating and stimulating and enriching for our spirits, as well as just being shelter. I think that's a great possibility.
Lucia, we know you have a strong interest in all these areas. Would you like to add more to the conversation?
I don't know. I feel
Because let's pull that mic a little closer to you so you don't have to break your back.
like I'm just trying to imagine what you're describing. That's really interesting. I don't really have much to, I'm also not an architect, but I don't know, I definitely, like, I have seen just through whatever social media platform, just like, which I don't use social media very often, but the, just kind of, and I don't know which homes are more sustainable than others. I haven't really gotten into, structural.
It's okay.
But I feel like I've seen some of these like sand homes that are just, have different like circular shapes, and they're just crafted from, just from the environment, and there's different like nooks and crannies within that. But it's definitely focused on just the holistic and just like the feel of you're living in the environment in your home, which is really cool. So it's cool to imagine.
Great, yeah, absolutely. And I think what you're all sort of starting to touch on is sustainability, and I know it's something we talked about here at the library. Was in addition to environmental sustainability, economic sustainability, was just energetic, our human sustainability, our wellness, and our ability to continue doing what we do that matters most to us. And so your story about that hospital wing is a really beautiful story, and that it really addresses that as well. And we all of us were talking beforehand about various levels of stress in our life, and I'm sure you can all relate. And I think that's going to be one of the challenges in the next 400 years for Portsmouth. Also, it's going to be mental health, spiritual health, physical health, and how these various economic and other systems thinking factors into that. I think is a great theme for us maybe to circle back to. All right, so Lucia, let's get to you. We've got a couple tough questions for you, so we really have confidence in you that no matter what you share, it'll be perfect. Part of the reason we're here tonight is to honor and to acknowledge the 400 years since Portsmouth was settled by English colonists. So we're kind of curious, from your perspective, and maybe some of your friends, how do you think future Portsmouthians will celebrate the city's past?
It's a difficult question.
Yeah.
I do feel like now it's hard for people my age to appreciate, especially I guess with our education system currently, just to appreciate colonial settlement and just Portsmouth's history specifically. You know, usually history topics in school are more about like the same things, at least the classes that I've had, just you know, war after war, and so it's not very focused on the local level, and then yeah, so I definitely haven't even really learned about Portsmouth's history outside of you know, going to Strawberry Bank with my family, and so it's difficult to say that in 400 years we will still at least my age will appreciate Portsmouth's history in that respect, but I hope that in 400 years we at least acknowledge the actionable steps that we as a community took to prevent climate change and to help keep Portsmouth sustainable. Whether that's advancing renewable energy sources or you know, showing support to specific politics that focus on removing fossil fuels, and then also just the preventative aspect, because even though I feel like not everybody believes in climate change or recognizes that it's happening now, we at least all want to still be here, so I hope that it's more, and I also listened to a podcast that kind of talked about climate delayism as a whole concept. So we know that this is happening now, and we, like Ronnie was saying, we have the technology and we have the knowledge. We just have to put that into actionable steps to get where we need to be.
Great. Related question around the social fabric and the history of Portsmouth. There's a lot of focus in Portsmouth in different pockets. I think it's fair to say that issues around diversity, equity, and inclusion have certainly in the library and many other places throughout the city and communities in the region have become more in the forefront. And we're wondering from your perspective and your generation whether you think those themes will continue to be an influence on the future of society in Portsmouth.
Yeah, so I feel like, I feel like I should preface this by saying I feel like I'm not the best person to be answering this question, as I'm a white, privileged young woman living in Portsmouth, and we live in white New Hampshire, but I don't know, I hope for the next however many years and the next 400 years, I feel like the minorities will hopefully become the majority as, you know, evolution continues, and yeah, I hope that, or I also believe that my age, or my generation has the skills, or not the skills, but I feel like we are, like you said, very, very focused on inclusion and acceptance and social justice issues, and hopefully we will see a lot of progress from the upcoming generations in that respect, and yeah.
Great. Thank you for your honesty and courage, and we know these are you know, challenging issues that not everyone entirely agrees with in every nuance, and again, thank you for being direct and sharing your views. I think that takes a lot of courage. I imagine everyone here agrees with that, even if they may not agree with every word that everyone is saying tonight, so thanks. Let's see, we had a question for Anna. and I either just skipped over it and she's not here, but I'm wondering if we might like to talk a little bit about the role of schools and education, public libraries in the next 100, 200, 300, 400 years. How will policies potentially impact education, public education? Will there be an increase in private education? It could take lots of different forms. I'm wondering if any of you have any thoughts on that. I know none of you are formally professional educators, but we have professional students, and we've all been students as well. So, do any of you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do. I always wanted to be a teacher, just never got there. But
You're teaching a lot.
I think it's interesting. Your point about that it's going to be hard for youth to relate to the history that we teach at Strawberry Bank. I think is completely accurate. I think we're seeing that already. I think the curriculum is designed around STEM and other more important curriculum, and so some of the stories that we tell at Strawberry Bank they don't resonate. They aren't impactful. They are history, yes, but they don't matter in terms of what we need to focus on going forward. And we need to really excite our youth into taking on some of these incredible challenges. I love what I see in the news. I don't think the youth of this world are going to sit by quietly. I think they're very animated and they care. And I think it's going to be up to the educational system to make sure we engage them and we offer them what they need and make sure they get the tools they need to solve some of these crucial issues.
Thank you. Brian, do you have any thoughts on public education, or Lucia? It looks like you had your...
Yeah, the first thing that came to mind was AI, and I don't know, it's an interesting topic, and we read a couple articles in school about it, but I hope we don't go the robotic route and just there's no more books and everything's banned and blah blah blah. But I do feel like there's a large portion of the population that still really enjoys reading and physical books and not online resources. I hope that in the future that it's not all technology and we don't have robot teachers and stuff like that. But I do feel like even though technology is growing and advancing, we still have, a lot of us have similar values and what we don't want to see go away. And so I feel like we will still have, the human aspect of human communication and our own downtime where we read books and things like that. So.
Thanks. Brian?
Those are really great points that resonate deeply with me. I'll mention that in my bio is also I'm an educator. I teach at.
I apologize.
No, that was me. I forgot to mention that when you asked me to introduce myself. So thank you for the opportunity to bring that part up because it's a part of me that's really important to me and I'm very excited about. I teach architectural design at UNH. But I also teach architecture and sustainability related topics in middle school and high school programs through the UNH Cooperative Extension. And so this is a really important topic to me and I perceive it as being very intricately connected to my work as an architect. It brings me to this point that my colleagues on the panel here, each of them said, I'm not an architect. And that's one of the things that I'm interested in as an educator is changing the shape of that, like who gets to be an architect. It has long been a pretty narrow profession, accessible by only a narrow range of our population. And it's a rough profession, and it takes a lot of work and a lot of training, but that doesn't mean you can't do it. And I perceive myself to be living proof of that, and I'm interested in broadening what the architect looks like, and who is represented in the field. And I think that the same, I think, applies for educators and who perceives themselves as educators. And so to bring this around to the question of education, and what that looks like, I think the more we broaden that work of educating, the more places we can go with this. I do believe also, to a point that Rodney made, I feel like we have too long been telling our children to work hard in the STEM-related topics and get a degree in a STEM-related profession and focus on this kind of technologically oriented work. And we've let our focus on the humanities wane. And we're not reading as much, and we're not telling stories as much, and we're not creating as much. And I think that that's the more important part. You know, people perceive with the architecture profession as being very technical, and it is. You know, building science is a really important thing, and you know, making sure that buildings stand up and that we're all safe. That's really wonderful, right? But it's important. But we live in them, and it's about humanity. And in our work, we're more interested in interpreting the human experience through the built environment. And I think that that's the important part of how we move forward and how we evolve in co-creation and in telling stories and holding on to stories and reinterpreting stories, broadening our stories, as it's been mentioned here on this panel about, you know, who's included in the past 400 years and what about the 400 years before that. So I think that is a really important part of our way forward, and I hope through my work in education, we still hold the space for the important technological stuff, the STEM education. We don't even talk about putting an A in there and calling it STEAM. I think that's a frivolous conversation. We just ground everything in the human experience and humanities.
Good stuff. I'd like to pivot just a little bit here. While we're here to talk primarily about Portsmouth and perhaps the region, I think it's fair to say we live on a planet. It's a global community. It's only getting more connected in some ways. If I can add my own 2 cents here for a little bit. So I'm curious at a public library in Kenya, what they would be discussing tonight if they were looking ahead at the next 400 years. What would the library in India be talking about, depending on where in India it might be? What is a community talking about in Iceland or anywhere on the planet, and what might be similar themes that they are considering? So I want to just consider broadening our scope for just the context of the remaining time, because I think what I'm hearing from all three of you is this yearning for, whether it's local, regional, that this community connection and fabric can hopefully get stronger to handle the challenges that lie ahead. I don't know how that resonates. Am I catching some of that? Is that fair to say so far? That community and community building is going to be a big part of the success over 400 years. So if we consider that, I can't help but want to talk a little bit about space travel. I was supposed to get a laugh. Actually, what I'd like to ask our panel is, what are your views on the both and scenario? That we develop a regenerative agricultural system, that we live in greater harmony with nature, that we are respecting the Earth's resources and using them efficiently, and we are leveraging technology in ways that make life even more fascinating than it already is. Is it possible that those two can coexist, that we might actually be venturing in 400 years into other planets? Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing is not the point. We're really not here, in my opinion, to judge. But I'd just like to kind of explore, do you think there's a possibility for both and? That we're both going to be able to live in a successful, thriving community that also uses technology in ways that might well just, we couldn't even imagine. And this was not a prepped question, so if they're looking a little confused, that's why. Does anyone want to offer any comments, rebuttals, or thoughts on that?
Well, I'm a huge Star Trek fan, so I'm all
Okay.
about, I'm all about space exploration. I just wonder, I think.
And I'm not promoting, I'm just raising the
Yeah,
conversation.
I just think that the quest for space is a quest for knowledge,
Hmm.
and that we likely will be able to use what we learned to address issues here on this planet, perhaps. I think it's human nature to want to explore and see what's out there and discover. And we've been doing that for hundreds of years, and I think it's part of the process, and hopefully, helps us on both worlds, wherever we may be.
Anything else?
I don't know, I do feel like that is something where, I don't know, it's hard to say. I feel like, there's already tree houses and people living underground and in various places you wouldn't typically imagine, but I don't know. I mean, I do feel like flying cars are soon to be a thing, and it's hard to say where everything will go, but I mean, I have no idea, but yeah.
Yeah, I can't help but read that as just returning to our the colonialism that got us into this mess to begin with, and I don't see that as finding a better place or another place to live as much as it would be looking for profiting enterprise. So I'm reluctant to buy into that. I would rather focus on where we are now, and it's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And we can work with this, and we can do some wonderful things. I don't think space is the next frontier. I really like the book by Peter Russell called Waking Up in Time, where he describes how evolution happened over many years, a very long time, and how we've evolved in the last since the Industrial Revolution, the many different kinds of evolutions and technological advances that we've seen in just that amount of time. It's just like a super thin surface on top of all of human evolution. And as that accelerates, the next frontier in his description is inside ourselves, in our minds and in our souls, and that's the place we've managed to manipulate everything around us and make it fit how we want it to be. We've conquered that. The one thing that we can't get is our own minds and our own souls. And Russell describes that's the next frontier, that we turn inward and we really, and it would just transform the way we relate with each other. And when people talk about pioneering other planets, they're thinking about global population increase and how that just isn't going to work. We can't all fit here and all live here together. But if we can do that work, I think there's room for many more here, and we will learn how to live with each other in close proximity, share resources. We abandon the myth of the individual, the kind of American individualism, and we accept a more pluralistic reality, and we can live with and for each other instead of against each other.
Okay. Well, really interesting conversation. And again, while my uncle worked for NASA, I just want to reiterate that I was not necessarily advocating for it, nor do I feel anyone is being defensive and it's okay to have disagreements. It was more just the idea, wondering, curiosity of whether the two can coexist, because I actually do tend to fall on the side of, we got plenty of work to do here, and the opportunity cost of investing in getting far away is substantial, but nevertheless, that's a conversation for another night, probably. Any thoughts or comments that anybody here tonight would like to ask or add, or any of our hosts? Yes,
You know,
I'm going to repeat the question, so go ahead and ask your question.
I'm sort of going back to a previous conversation here, but we hear a lot about solar energy and solar panels. You hear very little about geothermal. Why is that?
Okay, so the question was that we hear a lot about, for the recording and for anyone who might have hearing challenges, that we hear a lot about solar. Why are we not necessarily hearing as much about geothermal? Is that a fair caption? Okay. Anybody want to speak to geothermal?
Yeah, it's the less visible technology, right? So it exists and it's being used and being developed, but I think there's less of a market industry behind it. There's less stuff and production involved in that. Like with solar panels, there is a manufacturing industry for that. So it's a capitalist market commodity more so than the equipment for. This is my humble opinion and read on the situation, but also it's throwing some solar panels as a labor issue. It's easier to put solar panels on a building or on an installation than it is to drill hundreds of feet into the ground and install that technology. But it is a good it's a good source of a renewable source of heat energy exchange, and it's a yes and situation. We should use it all.
You could correct me if I'm wrong, Brian, but doesn't geothermal get negatively impacted by changes in groundwater levels? So if you install a geothermal well and it gets inundated by groundwater and or brackish groundwater, then you have an issue with its reliability.
Yeah, well, that infrastructure, can deteriorate with in the brackish groundwater situation. But it's still a heat sink or source. So yeah, we can develop the infrastructure, the physical material that can withstand that.
Great.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right. Yes, Katie.
So I really liked what Lucia said in her introduction, where she was taking inspiration from indigenous culture. So I was wondering if any of you have any other world cultures, past or present, that you think we could look at as inspiration for creating a better future for Portsmouth.
Did everybody hear that question? Drawing upon Lucia's comments about indigenous society, are there other present or future? Past cultures, groups that we can draw upon for lessons?
Yeah.
Okay. Might have to get back on that one.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
Okay. All right. Did you have your hand up, sir?
I did. I have a question. I'm very concerned about the younger generation's mental health because they got hit with the COVID lockdown and then many young people are middle age. Like, how are people dealing with that? Like, has it changed people's norms, etc.?
Okay, so the question was around the mental health of the generations that are in, let's say, high school and below, and the effect of COVID on their mental health, well-being, and health and life. Okay.
And I can just speak a little bit. We have a fantastic internship program at Strawberry Bank, and the young people that we're working with seem to do best when focusing on a challenge. So I think you're right. I think they're completely overwhelmed with everything they're supposed to be doing. But when posed a particular question to solve, especially during an internship, it's just incredible because they can really focus their talents and their energies and kind of push aside all of that, whatever's going on in their head to look at this one thing. And some of the results we've seen in terms of developing educational programs and other problems that we have at Strawberry Bank are amazing. So I think we just need to keep in mind that there's a lot that our youth are trying to take on, and maybe once in a while we can focus them on a challenge.
Gina, do you want to comment?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a hot topic right now. I don't know, it's hard to say. I feel like there's a lot of work that needs to be done around mental health, especially now, and I do agree with your perspective, but I feel like once you hone in on a certain challenge or a certain hobby, or not necessarily something to distract, but just to experience. And I also feel like this relates to the whole topic of Mother Nature and rooting down to your natural world, and that's something I actually wrote in my one of the UVM's supplemental essay was like, if you could build anything in the world, what would you build? And I talked about building some sort of, not really mental health center, but some sort of eco building in the woods where everybody is connected, you know, all generations and all backgrounds, all races, and just, you know, kind of together in that community, like you were talking about, which was interesting how you were describing all of the ways that architecture could go, because I was trying to kind of like invent some sort of thing like that, and then yeah, but I do feel like there's a lot of work to be done in terms of mental health, but hopefully that involves being more in touch with nature. So.
Brian, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, well, I have ringside seats with my 2 teenage daughters, and I don't disagree. The pandemic really, and not just my own kids, but you know, every kid and everybody, you know, took a hit on this with you know, what pandemic life did to us in social engagement, and I don't disagree that kids got hit especially hard in so many ways. I mean, we all know some stories about this. I hate to leave it there, though. I hate to just say, well, the pandemic really strained kids. There are so many different things, and you know, we could start complaining about screens and the internet and social media and all that, and that is true. But I also think that we have to take, you know, the older generation, myself, and maybe the generation behind me and in front of me, we need to take some responsibility in the crap that we're modeling for our kids. You know, in particular in the political forum, but just in so many ways where, you know, we're not modeling great behavior, and you know, and kids aren't dumb. They can kind of mold their own behavior. They can look at that and say, that's not how I'm going to behave. But they can see the you know, just the mess that we're making that they're going to have to deal with. So if that doesn't take a toll on their mental health, you know, I don't know how that stacks up against the pandemic or social media, but I think that would be one nice place for us to all focus when we're talking about how to care for our kids' mental health.
Great.
Steve, to your point about how other parts of this world might be having this conversation, and I do think that kids who have a chance to see the world and see that the problems in Iceland or Kenya or Nigeria or wherever are completely different than what we have here is very educational.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it can be very helpful because it's a whole different picture depending on what's going on in that particular nation.
Mm-hmm. Is there by any chance anybody here who's in high school who actually does have a trip planned for on?
Yeah,
Oh.
I forgot to mention this in my bio. I'm going to Indonesia for 4 weeks, starting June 28th to July 25th this summer. And we're, it's working on a bunch of different things, but marine conservation is the main focus and sustainable development. And the program Where There Be Dragons is the program that offers a bunch of different programs, honestly, around the world, and focuses on independent study projects, whether that be political issues or environment issues, and so a learning experience, culture experience, all of the above.
Fantastic.
Is that through the high school?
No, it's through an outside program. Yeah, Where There Be Dragons is the title.
You know, and I would add, because Mom always gets the last word, my mom is in South Africa right now, and I would say that what she's reported back to me from her experience in her 80s of traveling to see a very different part of the world has had a significant impact on her. And as somebody who has been a very active citizen in her life, I'm very curious to see how someone from her life experience will benefit from travel as well. So, fantastic. I think that's a great positive note to end on, how we can all benefit from learning from each other and from learning from other communities around the world. And we thank you all for coming tonight. And we want to get a round of applause for our panelists, for all the amazing contributions they've made. Thank you to Nicole and Katie and the library for holding this program, and we'll see you all again soon. Make sure to fill out the program evaluation form, because you do need a library book bag, trust me.